This is the third day of this February 1984 7-day retreat. And today we will read from and comment on what is said to be the autobiography of Wei Nang, also called the Sixth Patriarch. Scholars are not at all agreed whether this is an authentic thing, this autobiography, this particular one, or any of the many different versions that exist. The words were spoken at the date of this edition, which I don't know when it was, 60s, 1300 years ago. Places Wei Nang into about the 7th century AD. For people not conversant with Buddhism, being a patriarch means directly in line of the transmission of the teaching from the Buddha. The symbol of transmission of which this biography deals, being a robe and a bowl, supposedly, that of the Buddha himself. The very transmission that is supposed to have taken place between Buddha and his foremost disciple is also nowheres recorded. Scholars haven't found it in the thousands of sutras. And yet there is this patriarchate which ended with Wei Nang, where we'll read about that, how and why. There is in traditions, not just in the Zen tradition, and probably most spiritual traditions, this thing of a transmission through the ages, which, even though Buddhism, Zen, teaches the impermanence and transitoriness and emptiness of all things, establishes a little bit of permanency. A little something, maybe, to hold on to. One has to look into oneself if one is into this kind of thing, what this means to one. Again, this isn't read to quote authority. Somebody asked me recently, why do you always quote Wang Po? Am I quoting? If quoting means reading something, yes, I am. Is one taking the words at face value, trying to become conversant with them so one remembers them and can use them at certain times to teach them to others to remember them? In that case, no, there's no such quoting. If some materials are used, it is partly to give listeners some different words. Sometimes people tell me they tire of my words, which I can understand. I don't like to listen to them myself. And yet, what do these words signify? Grappling with this if needs be, to see if there's something within oneself that one can say, yes, this is what it means. This is clear. Words may not be so clear, but this is clear, this is so. Or it isn't so. Just to oppose an opinion to something that is said is in the quality or character of argument and leads nowhere except argument and whatever comes of argument. So if one doesn't understand something, does one seek an opposing opinion to hold on to or to battle what is said with? And or does one try to find out whether what is said is opinion? Maybe one can't tell. Maybe one cannot tell opinion from what is so. And what is said may be opinion. If one is unable to tell, can one leave it alone? Sometimes there is a ring of something in what one hears, and one can't leave it alone. One can't understand it, and yet one can't leave it alone. And maybe suddenly, one knows not why or how, it dawns what the meaning is, one sees it. People are at all times free to bring to meetings what they don't understand or question or challenge. We'll look at it together. Not as teacher and student, but as friends. From this biography, which is at times lengthy, we'll just take 3 very interesting and meaningful incidents. The one of the contest of poems in the monastery, the other one of Wei Nung's understanding and what is called the transmission of the robe and bowl to him. And then the incident of the pursuit after the robe and bowl by inhabitants of the monastery. Also, let me say here that this is not read to expose monastery life. Although it does. It does. But what is exposed in this particular structure, organization, holds for any, whether it be a spiritual organization, a governmental, industrial, teaching, because human beings make it up. And the human mind creates these things, creates hierarchy, power, and all that follows from that. And only a thoroughgoing transmutation of the human mind can change or crumble these structures. No conceptually or conceived revolution can. Only establishes a new hierarchy. So please, not to be misunderstood, this is not read to say, look what they're doing, and maybe implying, look, we're not doing that, whoever we are. We are human beings. And can one see within oneself all that goes on and can be triggered at any time? And see it so thoroughly that it will not assume power over this life. Wei Nang was a young boy, maybe a teenager, lost his father very early, supported his mother by gathering wood, and one time at the house of a customer where he delivered some wood, he heard some words of a sutra being recited, at which there was an awakening to what he calls discriminating alertness. Which may mean seeing things for what they are, as they are. He was supposedly illiterate, asked this man where one can find out about such things, and he directed him to the monastery where the fifth patriarch was teaching amongst a student or monk body of 1,000 or 1,500 monks. And he went there, had a brief interchange with the fifth patriarch, at which his name was something or other, Wei Mei or something, recognized the understanding in the boy and directed him to stay away from the main parts of the monastery, to stay in the courtyard pounding rice, fearing that emotions of jealousy, favoritism may incite the general population if this young newcomer, illiterate, unordained, etc., was admitted into the inner chambers. The fifth patriarch was getting old. He wanted a successor, and this was his way of looking for a successor, or maybe his device. On one occasion, I'm reading from the Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch on the Pristine Orthodox Dharma, translated from the Chinese by Paul and George Feng, publication of the Buddha's Universal Church in San Francisco, California. On one occasion, the Master summoned his disciples together. When they were all assembled, he said, "I have something to tell you. Man's birth and death is a serious matter. The whole crowd of you, from one day's end to another, are seeking only the field of merits. You are not seeking deliverance from the bitter ocean of births and deaths." A very traditional way of saying all you're looking for is gaining merit, maybe in the next life, doing good things or getting comfortable things right now, and not trying to really understand the meaning of life and death. What is the meaning of life and death? Which means the meaning of oneself. If you're deluded in your self-nature, how can wealth save you? It's interesting you're talking about wealth. I heard that most of the wealth accumulated in monasteries. People giving plentifully to monasteries for their own merit. Every one of you go and look within yourself for discriminating alertness. Realize the nature of wisdom from your own original mind. Every one of you compose a poem. Bring it to me to see. If you have awakened to the fundamental essence of the teachings, I will bequeath you the robe and the Dharma. Dharma meaning the teaching. It's a way of saying. And you will become the sixth patriarch. Now go like wildfire, do not dally. Mulling over it is useless. A person who realizes his own nature realizes it as soon as it is mentioned. If you're such an individual, even amidst the whirling swords of battle, you will still realize it. Having received this order, everyone withdrew. But discussing it among themselves, they said, "It is not necessary for all of us to calm our minds and to concentrate on composing a poem." To give to the patriarch. What good will it do? Shen Tzu is the head monk and is now our instructor. They already give instructions in the sutras, which goes on in Buddhist centers. Sutras are being studied and recited. Shen Tzu is the head monk and is now our instructor. He will certainly get it. That is the patriarchate. It would be a farce and a waste of mental energy for us to write poems for recitation. All of them heard this discussion and accordingly were satisfied. It's sometimes the result of discussion. One reaches sort of some kind of a level of agreement and can leave the whole thing. One has discussed it. As one person once put it in a discussion, it is sort of tying up loose ends into a package rather than leaving some loose ends which bother and nag. They all said among themselves, "Thereafter we shall follow Tzu as our master, so why bother to compose poems?" Shen Tzu reflected, he's the head monk, "They're not going to present any poem because I am their instructor. Therefore I must compose a poem and present it to the patriarch. If I do not offer a poem, how will the patriarch know whether the realization of my mind is deep or shallow? In presenting the poem, if my intention is just to seek the truth, it will be virtuous. But if I'm simply looking for the patriarchate, it will be evil. My attitude would be identical with that of the common man if I sought to deprive him of his office. How am I to decide? If I do not offer a poem, I shall never get the Dharma. Dharma is a Sanskrit word for truth, the truth and the order of the universe, also for the Buddha's teaching, and here, as the patriarch used it, for the transmission of what? What a predicament, said Shensi, what a quandary. He's really looking. What are my intentions in this? Even the intention to seek truth. There's a choice in that. A will to find the truth. And truth is very elusive to intention and will and seeking, because this is mental activity, age-old mental activity. Remember we read yesterday, when the mental activity stops, the iron tree blooms. But either intending to seek the truth and find it and write a poem about it, or to seek the patriarchate, it's both. The turning around and around of the mind, creating predicament in itself. Should I act virtuous? Should I, or act in an evil way to get it, what I really want? But do I really want it? We all know these quandaries. The quandaries of choice. I'm leaving out paragraphs here and there. When Shensu had composed the poem, he sought to present it several times. But when he reached the front of the hall, a turmoil of anxiety arose in his mind, and his whole body dripped with perspiration. He could not make up his mind to submit it. In 4 days he went back and forth 13 times, yet could not bring himself to offer the poem. Su then pondered, why not write it on the wall of the corridor, when the patriarch chances upon it, and should he speak well of it, then I will go forth and make obeisance, saying that I composed it. But if he says, it is not suitable, I would have wasted several years in this mountain receiving the people's homage. Then what is the use of continuing on? This incredible difficulty of facing possible humiliation. And what is it? Who is it? What is it that gets humiliated? If that isn't seen, then there is always the danger of humiliation and the pain of it, the consequences of it, and trying to make up for it. And so it moves around in a circle. That night, during the 3rd watch, while holding a lamp and without letting anyone know, he wrote on the wall of the southern corridor the poem, which represented his realization. The poem read, "This very body is a Bodhi tree," or "this body is a Bodhi tree." Bodhi tree was the Bodhi means wisdom, the tree under which the Buddha sat. And had supreme enlightenment. And here this poem says, the body is the Bodhi tree, the mind a bright mirrored stand. Whisked continuously and zealously, allowing no dust to cling. Sue finished writing the poem and returned at once to his room without anyone knowing about it. Again he ruminated, tomorrow the fifth patriarch will see the poem, and if he's glad, then I have an affinity with the Dharma. Meaning with the whole teaching. Do you see? Depending on what the teacher says. If he says it's good, then I must be good. Then I must understand. What is that? How does he know the teacher understands? He doesn't, so he is subject to possible knowing. To the extent that we're gullible, open to being told, instructed, taught, to that extent we're exploitable. Because we can't discern. How can we discern whether someone else understands? It's a very, very important question. We mentioned before, one can leave something, stand or sit there without rejecting it, without adopting it, but unless there's genuine insight, this ring of truth, one doesn't really know. This is where the transmission sort of comes in to put our mind at ease. Well, this has been passed down to us. Have your faith in that. And yet the Buddha, his parting words said, have refuge in no one and nothing. Take refuge in your own self, in the truth of your own understanding. In nothing and no one else. But if it is not acceptable, then I'm still in delusion because of the heavy hindrances of my past, and it will not be fitting for me to receive the Dharma. The Master's mind is difficult to fathom. It's also a phrase which is often used in Eastern religion or Eastern thought. If something doesn't pan out for me right now, it must be my heavy past karma. What is my heavy past karma? Other than years and years and years. We all carry the heavy past karma of all humanity, programmed in our brain. There's no reason for despair, no reason for not looking now and seeing something that is independent of all that past dross. Can become a real excuse for not looking at what's painful to look at or difficult. Blaming it on something or other. I'll skip over all kind of things that are going on and getting to the point where the patriarch sees the poem. And he reads it and he says, leave this poem. Oh, the paragraph started. The patriarch already knew that Shen Tzu was not able to enter the gate because he had not realized his self-nature. Patriarch understood that. He understood this before he started this whole thing out with the poems. But seeing the poem, he says, leave this poem for the people to study and recite. Practice in accordance with this poem prevents one from falling into evil paths. Practice in accordance with this poem brings great benefits. Let the disciples light incense and pay reverence, that they may observe this poem fully. They will then be able to realize their true nature. Gets the feeling, not trying too early to upset the apple cart. And after all, cleansing, wiping clean is a good activity. Whatever that means. The disciples all observed the poem and exclaimed, indeed, it is wonderful. But at the third watch, the patriarch summoned Tzu to his quarters and asked him, did you compose this poem or not? Tzu replied, yes, I composed it. I dare not presume to seek the patriarchate, but I hope, Venerable Sir, that in your compassion you will see whether or not the student has a little wisdom. Patriarch answered, in writing this poem, you show that you have not realized your original nature. You have only approached the door, you have not yet entered. The boundless awakening sought with your present views is definitely unattainable. Boundless awakening means that even in the most minute verbalization you know your own mind. You realize your own nature, that it does not start any thoughts, so there are none to be stopped. At all times you realize your own self from one moment's thought to another. The 10,000 things do not stagnate. The one reality is the same reality for all. The 10,000 situations are just as they are. The mind's suchness of things just as they are is the real gem of realization. If you realize it in that way, then this indeed is the boundless awakening of one's self-nature. He tells him, go away, compose another poem, but it isn't. Nothing is happening. Nothing is coming forth. Maybe too much dejection or too much wanting to produce something. Wanting to get it. Then 2 days later it happened that the boy passed the rice milling room chanting the poem. So Wei Nung heard about it and he wanted to see that poem. So somebody took him up there, even though he was really not supposed to be there. And he asked someone who was literate, would he write his poem? He said, I also have a poem, and I hope this official, there was a government official there or somebody, I hope this official will write it for me. The official said, you also have composed a poem? That's very extraordinary. Turning to the official, Wei Nung said, if you wish to attain the boundless awakening, sir, you must not slight a beginner. A person of the lowest class may have the understanding, whereas a person of the highest class may have only the dead idea of understanding. The official replied, "You just recite your poem and I will write it for you." You haven't heard the end yet. "If you should receive the Dharma, you must deliver me first." Do not forget this request. My poem was, "The very essence of Bodhi has no tree, nor is there bright mirrored stand. In reality there is nothing, so what is there to attract any dust?" Or another translation says, "Fundamentally not one thing exists," or "Fundamentally there is not one thing, so where is the dust to cling?" When this poem had been written, all the disciples crowded around in excitement. There was not one who did not express admiration. They all said among themselves, "This is most extraordinary. It shows one can't judge a person by his outward appearance. How is it that for so long we had not recognized a bodhisattva in the flesh?" When the patriarch saw the astonishment of the excited crowd, he was afraid that there may be those who would do me harm. He rubbed off the poem with his slipper, saying, "This one also has not yet realized his own nature." And everybody took it to be so. Which means that the teacher has spoken, that's it. Forget about what you saw before. It must have been your ego. Delusion. The next day the patriarch went silently to the milling room and he asked, is the rice done yet?" Rice, we're told, in the Orient is more than food. White rice is more than food. It is what nourishes all life. And he asks, in this roundabout way, not direct, but he asks, "Is the rice done yet?" And Wei Nang, I replied, "The rice has been done for some time, but it still needs to be sifted." A lot of sand and other stuff coming up in between the teeth. Then the patriarch indicated to him to come to his room, and Wei Nang did. In the middle of the night, they met. It says here, using his robe as a screen, so that no one should see, the patriarch instructed me in the Diamond Sutra up to the passage. And this is what he read. "Should there be nothing to which one is attached, then the mind is in its right abode. Should there be nothing to which one is attached, then the mind is in its right abode." Upon hearing this statement, immediately I had the great awakening that the 10,000 things were not separate from my self-nature. Thereupon I addressed the patriarch, saying, "Who would have known that one's self-nature is of itself fundamentally clear and pure? Who would have known that one's self-nature does not give rise to anything, and so nothing has to be terminated? Who would have known that one's self-nature is of itself basically whole? Who would have known that one's self-nature is originally without agitation? Who would have known that one's self-nature can give rise to the 10,000 things? The patriarch, knowing I had the awakening, spoke to me saying, if you do not know the original mind, studying the Dharma is useless. If you know your original mind, you will realize your own original nature. So in the third watch, without any other person knowing about it, he bequeathed to me the robe and the bowl, saying, you ought to become the sixth patriarch, take good care of yourself. And he said a poem and stuff, we'll skip that. But he also said, in handing over this robe and bowl, many years ago, the great master Bodhidharma first came to this land. And he explains how this robe came from India, transmitted here. After all this description and stuff, he says, since the robe may become a cause of contention, its transmission must cease with you. If you pass on the robe, your life will hang by a thread. You should leave quickly. I fear there are those who may harm you. In other words, he still gives it to him, but he says it's a very dangerous thing. People may want to get it from you, harm you, and don't ever you pass it on after this. Because it's a, how does he say? It's a cause of contention. Cause of dispute, who really deserves to have it. One can see the whole thing. Another little interesting incident where Patriarch accompanied him to a river. They had to set across the river by boat. And I, says Weinang, I immediately took hold of the oar, but the Patriarch said, it is appropriate that I should be rowing you. But I replied, when in delusion, the master is the guide. When awakened, one guides oneself. It's only proper that I should guide myself by my own nature. Or in another translation is that I take myself across, that I row myself across. Patriarch replied, so it is, so it is. When the fifth Patriarch returned, he did not appear in the hall for several days. The community began to be anxious and to inquire after his health, asking, Venerable Sir, aren't you feeling quite well? He replied, there is no sickness, The robe and the Dharma have already gone to the south. To whom, they asked, did you bequeath it? And he answered, he who is capable has received it. It was thus that the community found out what had happened. Whereupon several hundred people set out in pursuit of the robe and bowl. And maybe we'll leave this incident, which itself is the subject of a koan, for tomorrow. Title of that koan is Think Neither Good Nor Evil. Thinking neither good nor evil. What is truth? Or who am I? What am I? Or what is it? Thinking neither good nor evil, what is mo? Or just attending without this sticky judgment of good and evil. Questioning without knowing good or evil. We'll stop here for today.